Welcome to this edition of AFMC.
I'll tell you how I got better. I'm
Glad to be here.
But a mission to
Delivery of
improve.
I think that we're going to talk about everybody's.
Arkansas is the second highest prescriber.
Welcome to AFMC TV. I'm Robin Ledbetter. Thank you for joining us. Today I have with me Dr. Lisa Albuja. She specializes in trauma and disaster and has 3 trauma certifications. She works both with adolescents and adults and specializes in adverse childhood experiences. Dr. Albuja, thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here today.
So tell us about your work and what you do.
Okay, so I specialize mainly in trauma, and that can be any kind of trauma, single incident traumas. But the majority of the work that I do is what we call in our field complex trauma. So it's multiple traumas. For example, adverse childhood experiences. I do a lot of work in that. Medical traumas that have gone on for some time, basically any kind of traumas, and then the effects that come out of that. My main focus, the thing that I love to do the most, is adverse childhood experiences and breaking intergenerational cycles of trauma. So that's the main thing that I do. And my PhD is with a specialization in trauma and disaster.
And when you say breaking generational cycles, how does that start?
I believe that it starts by lowering ACE scores, adverse childhood experiences. If we can get in there young enough and we can begin to lower those scores, I think that's going to keep that generational cycle from, it just stops. And so I work with a lot of great clients, but unfortunately I'm working with clients who are much older that saw their parents going through that cycle and they weren't able to stop it. So eventually they do stop it. However, their children are already in the midst of multiple marriages, maybe addiction, maybe mental illness, things, divorces, things like that. So we need to get in there very early on and begin interventions early on. So example, if we can help parents learn how to parent in healthy ways, they can learn reflective functioning, that's just their awareness of how their parenting could be detrimental to the child, and then learn healthier ways of parenting. I think that that's going to be a start. My worry now is that we're all very busy, and there's no doubt about it, but we simply can't expect a child to be the adult in the family. And that's what I see is happening in too many family systems right now, especially those that are broken through separation, divorce, or blended families. And we just can't expect that a child to be the adult in the family and to know the things that were not modeled to them in a healthy, appropriate, secure way. It's just too big of an ask. They don't have the life experience or the brain maturation to be able to do that. So we as adults, whether we would love for it to be the parent, the caretaker, but anybody involved in the life of a child, we need to be able to step up and help these children. And I think that that's one way that we're going to be able to break these cycles.
You mentioned this briefly, that divorce is really at the forefront of your work. You do a lot of work with divorced families. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. Divorce, regardless of the statistics, divorce can damage, but it doesn't have to. And divorce is considered an adverse childhood experiences. In the original study, Felitti and Anda and colleagues study, it was listed as number 10. And so I really don't think that it gets the amount of attention that it should. And that makes perfect sense. It's not, sexual assault, physical abuse, neglect, all of those big ones. And I think just because it's divorce, it doesn't have that same call to arms. People don't gasp in horror, like they would if it were a sexual assault, physical assault, neglect, a parent with an addiction, etc. However, I think that it does have a detrimental effect, and I think that we need to rethink it. I worry that most people are like, yeah, my parents got divorced, so what? Well, what we know is that it can be detrimental to a child if it's not, if that child isn't able to work through that transition of that loss, which is grief. And many times it's very traumatic. So a lot of the parents that get referred to me, they're at war with each other, and they're going to use that child as a pawn to hurt each other, or to say "I told you so," or get what they want. That's always going to be problematic for a child, and a child again is looking to their parents and how they're handling that. So if a parents are warring, that leaves the child basically to figure out how to raise themselves. Oftentimes they end up becoming, it's called emotional parentification. They end up taking over parents' roles to try to help that parent, which is going to skew the parent-child relationship. There's many, many things that go along with that. So the work that I began to see when I was working with these youth of divorce, and let me say, these are parents who they have really good jobs. They have insurance. They drive nice cars. If you were to find them on social media, everything's great. But what I was beginning to see with these youth was I was seeing a new intergenerational cycle of trauma that was starting. So we've got with ACES, adverse childhood experiences, we've got that cycle that's already started from the parent, and it's inherited from the parent and their parenting practices, etc. But here we've got pretty much stable families, except this youth is beginning to have sex earlier, sexual promiscuity, addiction, begins drinking earlier, begins to turn to anyone that isn't a family member to get some kind of attention. We see a lot of, kiddos raising themselves. They're learning how to manipulate the system and, both parents and things like that. All those things that children need someone guiding them. Sometimes these are, appropriate at certain age levels. But if there isn't a parent or a guardian out there to help them with that, it can become problematic really quick. So even though that they were coming from these, stable households, I was beginning to see this new intergenerational cycle starting with them.
And what is the ASH program for shared parenting? That's something that you've created, right?
Yes. So I developed the ASH for shared parenting just as an intervention, thinking outside the box. What can we do to sort of hold these parents accountable? ASH stands for Accountability Starts Here. And that's exactly what it is. We've all have to hold ourselves accountable. They need to hold themselves accountable as parents. I need to hold myself accountable as a facilitator, a researcher, a theorist, a therapist. We all need to be holding ourselves accountable. And so it helps educate parents on the detrimental effects that divorce can have on a child, and not just in childhood, but what we know from the research. And we've got wonderful research out there, longitudinal studies that follow children 25 years post-divorce, post-childhood divorce. But what happens is it begins to change, and they carry that with them, and they carry that with them into their next relationships, into their adulthood, and it affects those relationships. It affects the way that they parent. And so I developed this in an effort just to help parents become aware that, divorce can harm, but it doesn't have to. Here's some things that we can do that are going to be helpful. Here's some things to look for in the child that, mean you are going to need some additional interventions or some help here, maybe some mediation or conflict resolution. We do a lot of conflict resolution. And it just educates and teaches healthier strategies in order to co-parent, and what those look like. I always tell parents, just because you fell out of love with the person does not mean that the child did. And most parents don't understand that. They want that child to be as mad at the parent as the parent is, but that's going to be problematic for that child.
And you're doing one on addiction as well?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And so, again, the trauma clinic wants to get involved with the epidemic of addiction, which I believe originates in adverse childhood experiences. And I look forward to be able to talking about that at our symposium that we're going to be having in October. Because I do believe that the origin of addiction lies in ACEs. And so we are getting involved in that work as well. And we're in the process of developing. We hope that it'll be launched next year. One for treatment, and then also one for prevention. Those need to be completely separate in regards to addiction, but we look forward to doing those. And the original ASH is the ASH program that's been up and running for probably about 9-10 years now. And that's the one that helps parents. That's the one that when I really recognized, hold on, I'm working with this child and everything's going really good, but then I send them back home and then they come back and I got to start all over again. And then I saw that cycle, that generational cycle happening right before my eyes. So the original ASH program was developed to help parents parent children of trauma or high anxiety or issues within the juvenile justice system, or within school or anything like that, help them parent. But they have to learn that awareness, that reflective functioning of how their parenting may not be as healthy as what they think that it is.
Well, you offer extensive therapy in ACES. So tell us a little bit about your practice. And you have a trauma clinic.
Yes. So we have a trauma clinic. We treat mainly any kind of trauma, specifically adverse childhood experiences, but all kinds of trauma, ACEs, medical trauma. I see a lot of medical trauma, single trauma, complex trauma. We do a lot of grief work. People don't quite understand that if you're doing trauma work, you're doing grief work. It can either be a complicated bereavement or it can just be the loss. When we're dealing with trauma. We also do a lot of restorative work, and I love that work, a lot of conflict resolution so that people don't have to go through the court system. Nothing against attorneys. My oldest son is one, and he's awesome. He's a public defender. But oftentimes, when two parents or warring parents hire attorneys, it can be very adversarial. And so a lot of the times we try to get involved maybe before they have to go back to court, and try to work that out between the co-parents to see if maybe if they don't have to involve the child in making decisions or showing up and testifying, which I think in the long run does become problematic and things like that. So we do a lot of conflict resolution. I'm really proud of our clinic being able to do that as well. And we're just working on helping families restore issues that are going on so that they can better get along.
And referrals aren't required to see one of your clinicians there in your clinic?
No, not at all. If somebody wants to make a referral, of course, we're happy to take that referral, but just contacting our office, and I give my number. I like to sort of stay in charge of that so I can be sure that the person's getting the appropriate therapist that they need. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what does the future look like for ACES work in Arkansas? That's a pretty loaded question, but what does the future look like for you? That's
okay. As long as I have a breath in my body, I'm going to be talking about ACEs and breaking intergenerational cycles of trauma, because it's my professional life's work, and all the research, everything that I do will be in regards to do that. And I'm hopeful that, one day we will put ACEs in remission. And I think through, positive ACEs, that resiliency that Dr. Chad Rogers is always talking about, which I love. I think we're going to be able to do that. I know that we can. It's going to be, in my opinion, it's going to be policy. We've got to change policy because what we're doing is not working. And oftentimes it's very antiquated. It's not trauma informed. It doesn't look at parental ACEs, which I do a lot of work in parental ACEs and how to break those. And so a lot of those old interventions, they just don't have the qualifications of where we need interventions to be present day, because we have to recognize we have to meet that person and these parents and these children where they're at. I just don't think there's any longer going to be one size fits all. I just don't think that that's going to be the case anymore. And I think it's going to take policy to change that and then come up with interventions that can meet people where they're at.
So before we go, tell us about your event in October, and who is it for? Who can attend? What do you want the healthcare community to know about it?
Oh, yeah. We want as many people that can come. It's the ACE Trauma Symposium for stakeholders. And stakeholders just means if you're involved in the life of a child, no matter what capacity, we want you there. And it's education. It's all day long. It starts at 8. It ends at 3:30. It's completely free. We do provide a light breakfast and lunch. We just ask that everybody please RSVP. You please feel free to give out my phone number for that. And we would love to have them. This year, there's a focus on, of course, we're always talking about adverse childhood experiences. This year, there's a focus more on addiction. And then also another thing that I wanted us to focus on at this year's symposium is bridging the gap between medical and mental. And I think, again, that's just one of those policies. We need policy on ACEs. We need policy on addiction. I think we need policy in regards to VA, the VA and veterans. I think we need a lot of policy written there. But I think we especially start needing policy on bridging that gap between medical and mental. The brain is attached to the body, but sometimes we forget that, but we need to be on the same page and figuring out. So we have some excellent psychiatrists, doctors, emergency room doctors that are going to be talking about what does that look like? What does that look like moving forward? And what does policy look like that? What can we do in our area maybe to lead by example? And then, of course, I love the law. And so we're so lucky. We have 7 sitting judges coming. And to me, that's just phenomenal that 7 judges would actually want to come to the symposium. Just a lot of things. And if anyone wants to get in touch with me, I can send them all the speakers, everybody who's going to be speaking and the topics and all, but everybody's invited. I hope you can come, Robin.
Well, it sounds amazing. I hope I can too. I am grateful for the work that you're doing, Dr. Albuja, and also the passion that you have for the field. It shows. Thank you so much for being here today and sharing that passion with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And that's it for this episode of AFMC TV. Thanks for joining us and have a great day.